I followed a red light into the woods. It was human skin. 3 animals died without a single drop of blood left in their bodies, and my neighbor sat outside her door, her hands still wet and faintly red, smiling at me. She knew I had seen. I had seen her shed her skin. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand where I come from. You need to understand Tlaxcala. My name is Diego Serrano, and I was 17 years old when I learned that the monsters my grandmother whispered about were not stories meant to frighten children into obedience. They were warnings, warnings that I ignored until it was almost too late. San Miguel Contla does not appear on any tourist map. You will not find it in travel guides or recommended destinations for visitors seeking authentic Mexican culture. It is a small community nestled in the hills of Tlaxcala, the smallest state in Mexico, a place where paved roads turn to dirt and electricity flickers during storms like a candle fighting against the wind. The houses are modest, built from concrete blocks and corrugated tin roofs that sing when the rain falls. During the day, children play in the streets while their mothers hang laundry on lines strung between wooden posts. Roosters crow at dawn, dogs bark at strangers. Old men sit on plastic chairs outside corner stores drinking beer and discussing politics they cannot change. It sounds ordinary. It sounds like 1,000 other villages scattered across the Mexican countryside. But Tlaxcala is different. Tlaxcala has always been different. My grandmother used to say that Tlaxcala is where the witches were born. Not the witches you see in American movies with pointed hats and broomsticks and green skin. No. The witches of Tlaxcala are something far older, far worse. She called them Tlahuelpuchi, a word from the Nahuatl language that roughly translates to those who drink blood. According to the old stories, these creatures are not made. They are born. The curse passes through bloodlines, awakening when a girl reaches puberty, transforming her into something that hungers for the blood of the innocent. And when night falls, they shed their human skin like a snake and take to the skies, hunting for their prey. I never believed these stories. How could I? I was 17. I had a smartphone. I watched American shows on Netflix. I knew that the world operated on logic and science, not superstition and ancient curses. When my grandmother hung garlic around my baby cousin's crib, I rolled my eyes. When my mother placed scissors under my mattress in the shape of a cross, I laughed and asked if she also believed in Santa Claus. Some lessons can only be learned through blood. Some truths can only be understood when they are staring at you with eyes that glow like embers in the darkness. I lived with my parents and younger sister in a house that my grandfather built with his own hands 40 years ago. It was not large, but it was ours. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen that always smelled of corn tortillas and chili, a small living room where we gathered to watch telenovelas in the evenings. The walls were painted blue, the color of the Virgin Mary, because my mother believed it would protect us from evil. There was a crucifix above every door, a portrait of the Virgin of Guadalupe in the hallway. Holy water in a small container by the entrance refreshed every Sunday after Mass. Our house shared a fence with the property of Doña Soledad. I do not know how old she was. She could have been 60. She could have been 90. Her face was a map of wrinkles, her hair white as bone, her back bent from years of carrying burdens I could not imagine. She had lived in that house for as long as anyone could remember. My father said she was already old when he was a boy. My grandmother, before she passed, said that Doña Soledad had been old when she herself was young. It was as if time moved differently for the woman next door, stretching and bending around her like water around a stone. She lived alone. No husband, no children, no family that ever came to visit. Her house was smaller than ours, made of adobe bricks that were crumbling in places, the roof patched with sheets of rusted tin and black plastic tarps. The windows were always shuttered, even during the hottest days of summer, when everyone else threw theirs open to catch whatever breeze might wander through. The only light that ever escaped from inside was the faint orange glow of candles flickering behind the cracks in the wooden shutters, like eyes blinking in the dark. People came to her house sometimes, never during the day. Always at night, slipping through the shadows like guilty secrets. They knocked on her door with a rhythm that seemed rehearsed, 3 quick taps followed by 2 slow ones. The door would open just enough to let them in, then close immediately behind them. They never stayed long, an hour, sometimes 2. When they left, they walked quickly, heads down, as if afraid to be seen. My mother told me that Doña Soledad was a curandera, a healer who used herbs and prayers to cure illnesses that doctors could not explain. She said that people came to her for remedies, for blessings, for help, with problems that required solutions beyond the reach of modern medicine. A woman whose husband was unfaithful, a man whose business was failing, a mother whose child would not stop crying no matter what she tried. That was the explanation my mother gave. That was the logical reason for the midnight visitors and the closed shutters, and the strange smells that drifted from the old woman's house. The smell. I need to tell you about the smell. It was worst at night when the air grew still and heavy, a thick, pungent odor that crept through the gaps in our walls and settled in my bedroom like an unwelcome guest. Herbs, yes. I could recognize some of them. Copal, the resin that Mexicans have burned for thousands of years in religious ceremonies. Rosemary, something that might have been rue, but underneath those familiar scents was something else, something that made my stomach turn and my skin crawl. It was the smell of decay, the smell of meat left too long in the sun, the smell of something rotting, something dead, something that should have been buried long ago. When I mentioned it to my mother, she said it was probably a dead rat in the walls. When I mentioned it to my father, he said the old woman was just burning garbage because she was too poor to pay for proper disposal. When I mentioned it to my friends at school, they laughed and said I was imagining things, that I should stop watching so many horror movies. I wanted to believe them. I tried to believe them. But every night when that smell crept into my room, I would lie awake and wonder what kind of rat could produce such an odor. What kind of garbage could smell like flesh rotting on the bone? There were sounds, too. Every night when the village fell silent and the only light came from the stars and the occasional passing car on the distant highway, I would hear noises from Doña Soledad's house. The scraping of heavy objects being dragged across the floor, the creak of old wood under weight, murmuring low and rhythmic like someone reciting prayers or incantations in a language I did not recognize. Sometimes I thought I heard chanting. Sometimes I thought I heard crying. And sometimes in the darkest hours before dawn, I thought I heard laughter. High and thin and wrong like the sound a person makes when they have lost their grip on sanity. Fear is a strange thing. When it is constant, when it surrounds you every day and every night, you learn to live with it. You learn to ignore it. You tell yourself that the sounds are just the old woman talking to herself because she is lonely. You tell yourself that the smell is just her cooking strange remedies for her clients. You tell yourself that the candles are just her way of saving money on electricity. You build walls of logic around the fear brick by brick until it is contained, until you can pretend it does not exist. I was very good at pretending. For years I walked past her house every day on my way to school and back. I nodded politely when I saw her shuffling to the corner store to buy bread and milk. I said good morning and good evening like my mother taught me, because respecting your elders is important in Mexican culture, even when those elders make your skin crawl. I did everything right. I kept my distance. I minded my own business. I did not ask questions. But curiosity is a poison that works slowly, seeping into your blood drop by drop until it reaches your heart. The first time I truly looked at Doña Soledad, I mean really looked at her, was 3 weeks before the night that changed everything. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was sitting on our porch scrolling through my phone when she emerged from her house to water the few scraggly plants that clung to life in her tiny garden. She moved slowly, each step deliberate, as if her bones ached with every motion. But it was not her movements that caught my attention. It was her eyes. She turned and looked directly at me. Not a glance, not a casual observation. She fixed her gaze on me and held at her dark eyes boring into mine with an intensity that made me feel as if she was seeing something inside me that I did not know existed. Her lips curved into a small smile, but there was no warmth in it, no kindness. It was the smile of someone who knows a secret, someone who is waiting for the right moment to reveal it. I looked away first. I always looked away first. But in that brief moment of connection, I felt something shift inside me. A door that had been locked for 17 years cracked open just a sliver, and through that crack, fear began to seep in. Real fear. The kind that settles in your bones and refuses to leave. That night, the sounds from her house were louder than ever. The scraping, the chanting, the laughter. I pressed my pillow over my ears and tried to sleep, but the sounds found their way through. They always found their way through. The days that followed were strange. I began to notice things I had never noticed before. The way dogs would cross to the other side of the street when they approached her house, their tails tucked between their legs. The way birds never landed on her roof even though they covered every other house in the neighborhood with their droppings. The way the plants in her garden, despite receiving water and sunlight, always looked withered and gray as if the soil itself was poisoned. I noticed the way people talked about her too, or rather the way they did not talk about her. When her name came up in conversation, voices would drop to whispers. Eyes would dart around to make sure she was not nearby. And sentences would trail off into silence, thoughts left unfinished, words swallowed before they could escape. One evening I overheard my grandmother's sister, my great-aunt Esperanza, talking to my mother in the kitchen. I was supposed to be doing homework in my room, but I had come out to get a glass of water. When I heard them mention Doña Soledad's name, I stopped in the hallway and listened. "That woman is not right," my great-aunt was saying. "She never ages. Have you noticed that I remember when your mother was young, Soledad already looked exactly as she does now? The same face, the same bent back, the same dead eyes. 60 years and she has not changed at all." My mother made a sound that was half dismissal, half prayer. "You are being superstitious," she said. "Some people just age well, age well." My great-aunt's laugh was sharp and bitter. "She does not age at all. And those visitors at night, what do you think they are really coming for? No curandero works only in the darkness. No healer refuses to see patients when the sun is up. You know what she is. You have always known. You just refuse to say it out loud because speaking the truth gives it power." There was a long silence. Then my mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Even if what you say is true, what can we do? She has never harmed us. She has never harmed anyone in this village." "That we know of," my great-aunt replied. "The Tlahuelpuchi are clever. They do not hunt where they live. They fly to other villages, other towns, and take their victims there. By the time the sun rises, they are back in their beds, wearing their human skin, pretending to be one of us." I stood frozen in the hallway, my glass of water forgotten in my hand. The word echoed in my mind like a bell that would not stop ringing. Tlahuelpuchi. I had heard it before, of course. Everyone in Tlaxcala had heard it. It was our bogeyman, our monster under the bed, the threat mothers used to make children behave. Be good or the Tlahuelpuchi will come for you in the night. Go to sleep or the Tlahuelpuchi will drink your blood. But this was different. My great-aunt was not telling a story to frighten a child. She was speaking to my mother adult to adult with the conviction of someone stating an obvious fact. The sky is blue. Water is wet. The old woman next door is a creature that sheds her skin and flies through the night to feed on human blood. I went back to my room without getting my water. I lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. It was ridiculous. It was impossible. We lived in the 21st century. There were satellites orbiting the Earth, sending signals to the phone in my pocket. There were scientists splitting atoms and mapping the human genome. There was no room in this world for witches who removed their skin and flew through the darkness. And yet the smell was real. The sounds were real. The way animals avoided her house was real. The way she looked at me was real. The certainty in my great-aunt's voice was real. Monsters do not disappear just because we stop believing in them. They simply learn to hide better. I began watching Doña Soledad more carefully after that. Not obviously. I was not stupid. I watched from the corner of my eye. I watched through gaps in the fence. I watched from my bedroom window at night, peering through a crack in the curtains, my heart hammering in my chest every time I saw that faint candlelight flickering behind her shuttered windows. I noticed patterns. She never left her house during the full moon. On those nights the candles burned brighter than usual, and the sounds from within were louder, more urgent. The chanting rose and fell like waves crashing against a shore. The scraping sounds continued for hours without pause. And the smell, that terrible rotting smell, grew so strong that I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. I noticed that she always bought the same things from the corner store: candles, salt, eggs, and occasionally cuts of meat that the shopkeeper retrieved from a cooler in the back, wrapped in brown paper and handed over without a word. What kind of meat it was I never found out. I was too afraid to ask. I noticed that sometimes late at night lights would appear in the hills surrounding our village. Not the headlights of cars or the flashlights of hunters. These lights were different. They were red, a deep blood red that seemed to pulse and glow with its own inner fire. They moved in ways that no ordinary light should move, drifting and dancing like flames caught in a wind that did not touch the trees below. The first time I saw those lights, I told myself they were probably campfires. Kids from the village sneaking out to drink and party in the hills away from their parents' watchful eyes. The second time I told myself they might be some kind of natural phenomenon, swamp gas or bioluminescent insects, something with a scientific explanation that I simply did not understand. The third time I stopped trying to explain them. Some things cannot be explained. Some things simply are. 3 nights before everything changed, I woke to a sound that was different from all the others. It was not scraping, it was not chanting, it was not laughter, it was a scream. High and thin and terrible, it cut through the night like a blade, jolting me out of sleep and sending my heart racing. I sat up in bed, my sheets twisted around my legs, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The scream came again, and this time I recognized it. It was not human. It was an animal, a dog maybe, or a pig being slaughtered, but slaughter does not happen at 3 in the morning, and the sound was coming from the hills. I went to my window and looked out. The village was dark and silent, every house sealed tight against the night, but up in the hills I saw it. A red light, brighter than I had ever seen it before, moving slowly across the ridge. It dipped and rose as if whatever carried it was searching for something or feeding on something. The screaming stopped. The light continued to move for a few more minutes, then winked out like a candle being blown out by an invisible mouth. I stood at the window for a long time, staring at the dark hills, waiting for the light to return. It did not. Eventually, the cold drove me back to bed, but I did not sleep. I lay awake until dawn, listening to the silence, counting the seconds between my heartbeats, wondering what had died up there in the darkness. The next morning, I heard the news. A farmer on the outskirts of the village had lost 3 goats during the night. They were found at dawn, lying in a neat row beside their pen. There were no wounds on their bodies. No signs of a struggle, no predator tracks in the dirt. They were completely drained of blood. The farmer blamed coyotes. The police, when they bothered to come out and take a report, blamed wild dogs. My mother blamed the heat, saying it probably caused the animals to have heart attacks. Everyone had an explanation. Everyone had a logical reason for why 3 healthy goats had suddenly dropped dead without a single mark on their bodies. I knew better. I had seen the red light in the hills. I had heard the screaming that stopped so abruptly. And when I walked past Doña Soledad's house that afternoon, I saw her standing in her doorway watching me with those dark, knowing eyes. She smiled at me again. That same smile, cold, patient, full of secrets. And in that moment I understood something that changed everything. She was not just a strange old woman. She was not just a curandera who helped people with herbs and prayers. The truth was far simpler and far more terrifying. The monster that my grandmother had warned me about my entire life was living right next door, and she knew that I was beginning to suspect. The night it happened was 2 days after the goats were found dead. I remember because it was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays were when my father worked the late shift at the textile factory in Apizaco. My mother had gone to bed early with a headache, and my younger sister was sleeping over at a friend's house. I was alone in my room scrolling through social media on my phone, trying to distract myself from the thoughts that had been circling my mind like vultures over carrion. It was nearly midnight when the dogs began to howl. At first I thought nothing of it. Dogs howl all the time in villages like ours. They howl at the moon. They howl at passing cars. They howl at each other across the empty streets, carrying on conversations in a language that humans will never understand. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, I realized that this was different. These howls were not the lazy, half-hearted sounds of bored animals looking for attention. They were sharp, urgent, terrified. Every dog in the village seemed to be crying out at once. The sound rose and fell in waves, building to a crescendo that made the hair on my arms stand up. I set down my phone and went to the window, pressing my face against the cool glass to peer out into the darkness. The street was empty. The houses were dark. Nothing moved in the shadows between the pools of light cast by the few working street lamps. But the dogs kept howling. And beneath their cries I heard something else, something that made my blood run cold: silence. It spread outward from Doña Soledad's house like ripples in a pond. One by one the dogs stopped howling, not gradually the way animals normally quiet down when they lose interest, abruptly, completely, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the world. The dog closest to her property fell silent first, its howl cutting off mid-cry. Then the next one, and the next. Within 30 seconds, every dog in the village had stopped making a sound. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was not merely the absence of noise. It was a presence, heavy and oppressive, pressing down on my chest like an invisible weight. The normal sounds of night, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of wind through the trees, the distant hum of traffic on the highway, all of it had vanished. The world had become a vacuum, empty and suffocating. I stood at my window frozen, my breath fogging the glass in front of my face. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat and my temples and the tips of my fingers. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away from the window, to crawl under my bed, to hide beneath the covers and pray that whatever was happening would pass me by. But I did not move. I could not move, because that was when I saw it. From Doña Soledad's house something emerged, not through the door, not through the windows. It seemed to seep through the cracks in the walls themselves, flowing outward like smoke, like mist, like something that had no fixed form. At first it was shapeless, a dark mass that hovered above the roof of her crumbling adobe house. Then it began to glow. Red, deep blood red, the color of fresh wounds, of arterial spray of life escaping the body. The glow pulsed and throbbed, brightening and dimming in a rhythm that seemed almost organic, almost like breathing. The mass began to take shape. It elongated, stretching upward toward the stars, then folding in on itself like cloth being arranged by invisible hands. Within seconds it had transformed into something that made my mind rebel against what my eyes were seeing. It was a sheet of some kind, rippling and undulating in the still air, glowing with that terrible red light. It was too large to be a blanket, too irregular to be a flag. It moved with purpose, with intention, drifting slowly upward until it hovered about 20 feet above the ground. And then it began to move. Not randomly, not aimlessly, but with clear direction. It floated away from the house, away from the village, heading toward the hills that loomed dark and silent against the star-filled sky. I watched it go, my rational mind screaming that this was impossible, that there had to be an explanation, that I was dreaming or hallucinating or losing my grip on reality. But deep down in the part of me that still remembered my grandmother's stories, I knew exactly what I was seeing. The skin of a Tlahuelpuchi flying through the night while its owner hunted for blood. I should have stayed inside. I should have locked my door, closed my curtains, and hidden until morning. That would have been the smart thing to do. That would have been the safe thing to do. But something was happening to me, something I could not control. My hands were moving on their own, pulling on my jeans, lacing up my sneakers, grabbing my phone from the bed. My legs were carrying me down the hallway, past my mother's closed bedroom door, through the kitchen, and out the back entrance of our house. The night air hit me like a wall of ice. It was cold, far colder than it should have been in late spring, and my breath came out in visible puffs of white vapor. I stood in our small backyard, shivering, watching the red glow drift farther and farther toward the hills. Every fiber of my being was telling me to go back inside. Every lesson I had ever learned about survival was begging me to retreat. But my feet started walking, toward the glow, toward the hills, toward whatever horror awaited me in the darkness. It was as if I was no longer in control of my own body. As if something had reached inside me and taken hold of my will, bending it to a purpose that was not my own. I tried to stop. I tried to turn around, but my legs kept moving, carrying me through the gate and our fence, down the dirt road that led out of the village, and onto the narrow path that wound its way up into the hills. The feeling of being pulled was overwhelming. It was not physical, not like someone grabbing my arm and dragging me forward. It was deeper than that. It was in my mind, in my soul, a compulsion so powerful that resisting it felt like trying to stop my own heartbeat. Part of me wanted to follow the light. Part of me needed to follow it. And that part was winning. Whatever you seek in the darkness will find you first. My grandmother used to say that. I never understood what she meant until that night. The path grew steeper as I left the village behind. The houses disappeared, replaced by fields of corn and maguey that stretched out on either side of me like walls of shadow. The stars overhead were bright, brighter than I had ever seen them, but their light did nothing to dispel the darkness that surrounded me. If anything, they made it worse. They were too bright, too numerous, too close. The sky looked wrong somehow. Distorted, as if reality itself was bending around whatever force had drawn me out of my home. I kept walking. I did not know for how long. Time had lost all meaning. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like seconds. The only constant was the red glow ahead of me, always the same distance away, never getting closer, no matter how fast I walked. It was leading me somewhere, guiding me, playing with me like a cat plays with a mouse before delivering the killing blow. The forest swallowed me without warning. One moment I was walking through open fields, the next I was surrounded by trees. Oaks and pines pressed close on either side, their branches reaching toward each other overhead to form a canopy that blocked out the stars. The darkness here was absolute. I could not see my hand in front of my face. I could not see the ground beneath my feet. I stumbled forward blindly, guided only by that distant red glow that flickered between the trunks like a will-o'-the-wisp. The cold deepened. It seeped through my clothes, through my skin, settling into my bones with a permanence that felt almost malevolent. Frost formed on my breath. My fingers grew numb. My teeth began to chatter so violently that I had to clench my jaw to keep them still. And then I noticed the silence. It was the same silence that had fallen over the village when the dogs stopped howling, but magnified 100-fold. There were no insects here, no frogs singing in the darkness, no owls calling to each other across the treetops. The forest was utterly, completely, terrifyingly quiet. The only sound was my own breathing, ragged and harsh in the stillness, and the crunch of my footsteps on the carpet of dead leaves beneath my feet. Even those sounds seemed muted somehow, absorbed, as if the darkness itself was hungry for noise and was swallowing every vibration before it could travel more than a few feet. I stopped walking. For the first time since leaving my house, the compulsion that had been driving me forward seemed to loosen its grip. I stood in the darkness panting, trying to get my bearings. The red glow was still visible ahead of me, but it had changed. It was no longer moving. It hovered in place, pulsing slowly, waiting. That was when I realized the truth that should have been obvious from the beginning, but that I had been too entranced, too controlled, too stupid to see. I was not following the light. The light had been leading me here. I turned around, intending to run, to flee back the way I had come, and never look back. But the path was gone. Where there had been a clear trail through the trees, there was now only dense undergrowth, thorny bushes and twisted roots and fallen branches that formed an impenetrable wall. I spun in a circle, searching desperately for another way out, but every direction looked the same. Trees pressed close on all sides. Shadows pooled between them like black water. The red glow behind me pulsed faster, brighter, as if excited by my panic. I had walked into a trap, and now the trap was closing around me. Panic seized me completely. I crashed through the undergrowth, heedless of the thorns that tore at my clothes and skin, the branches that whipped across my face, the roots that grabbed at my ankles and tried to pull me down. I ran in what I thought was the direction of the village, but every few seconds I would hit another wall of vegetation and have to change course. Left, right, forward, back. I was running in circles. I knew it, but I could not stop, could not think. Could not do anything except flee from the red light that seemed to follow me no matter which way I turned. My lungs burned. My legs screamed for rest. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. But still I ran, crashing through the forest like a wounded deer fleeing from wolves, my breath coming in ragged sobs that echoed through the silent trees. And then, without warning, the forest opened up. I stumbled out of the undergrowth and into a clearing. I fell to my knees on the grass, gasping for air, my entire body trembling with exhaustion and fear. For a moment I just knelt there, my head bowed, my hands pressed against the cold earth, trying to catch my breath, trying to convince myself that the nightmare was over, that I had escaped. But when I looked up, I knew that the nightmare was only beginning. The clearing was roughly circular, about 50 feet in diameter, surrounded on all sides by the same dense forest I had just escaped. The grass beneath my knees was short and even, as if someone had trimmed it recently, and it was wet with dew that soaked through my jeans and made my skin prickle with cold. In the center of the clearing stood a single tree, ancient and gnarled, its trunk twisted into shapes that looked almost deliberate, almost intentional, as if the wood itself had been molded by hands that understood geometry far beyond human comprehension. And above that tree, hovering motionless in the still air, was the red light. From here I could see it clearly for the first time. It was not a light at all. It was skin, human skin, the skin of a woman still bearing the contours of the body it had once covered, floating in the air like a grotesque balloon. I could see the shape of breasts, of a stomach, of thighs. I could see the holes where the eyes had been, the slit where the mouth had opened. It was complete, unmarred, removed from its owner with a precision that spoke of long practice and terrible skill. The skin glowed from within, pulsing with that deep red light, casting shadows that danced across the clearing like demons celebrating some unholy ritual. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my body had finally given out. I knelt there on the wet grass, my legs refusing to move, my voice trapped in my throat. That was when I heard the sound, a wet, rhythmic noise coming from the other side of the clearing, slurping, sucking, the sound of liquid being drawn through a narrow opening over and over again with mechanical regularity. It was coming from somewhere near the base of the tree, from the deepest shadows where the red light did not reach. I did not want to look. Every survival instinct I possessed was screaming at me to keep my eyes fixed on the ground, to not see whatever was making that horrible sound. But the same compulsion that had drawn me out of my house, the same force that had led me through the forest and into this clearing, now turned my head against my will. I looked, and I saw her. Not Doña Soledad. Not the bent old woman who shuffled to the corner store to buy candles and salt and mysterious cuts of meat. What I saw was something else entirely, something that had shed its human disguise along with its human skin. It was crouched at the base of the tree, bent over a dark shape that lay motionless in the grass. The creature's body was exposed raw, a nightmare of wet red muscle and pulsing blue veins. It had no skin. Every fiber of its anatomy was visible, glistening in the dim light like meat on a butcher's block. Its spine curved in an unnatural arc, each vertebra visible beneath the transparent membrane that covered its back. Thin, membranous wings protruded from its shoulder blades, folded against its body like the wings of a bat at rest. Its hands ended in fingers that were far too long, far too thin, tipped with nails that had grown into curved black talons. Those talons were currently buried in the body beneath it, holding it still as the creature lowered its head and continued to feed. The head was the worst part. It was still recognizably human in shape, but the face had been transformed into something monstrous. The nose had flattened into two slits that flared with each breath. The lips had pulled back to reveal rows of needle-thin teeth, each one as long as my little finger. And the eyes were solid yellow, without iris or pupil, glowing with their own inner light, like lanterns in the darkness. As I watched, paralyzed by horror, the creature lifted its head from its prey. A long tongue, impossibly long, forked at the tip like a snake's, slithered out from between those needle teeth and licked the blood from its lips. Its burning gaze swept across the clearing, searching, hunting, and then it found me. The creature went still, its head tilted to one side the way a dog's head tilts when it hears an interesting sound. Those glowing orbs fixed on me with an intensity that made every muscle in my body lock up tight. I could not move, could not breathe, could not look away. For one endless moment we stared at each other across the clearing. The hunter and the hunted, the monster and its next meal. The creature smiled, or at least its lips pulled back further from those terrible teeth in an expression that might have been a smile. It was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen, a smile that promised pain, a smile that promised death. It rose to its full height, and I saw that it was taller than any human, its limbs stretched and elongated, its proportions wrong in ways that made my eyes hurt to look at. Blood dripped from its chin, from its talons, pooling on the grass beneath it, in a dark stain that spread outward like a shadow. The creature took one step toward me. Then another. Its movements were slow, deliberate, almost casual. It knew I could not run. It knew I could not fight. It was savoring the moment, enjoying my terror, feeding on my fear, almost as much as it would soon feed on my blood. I finally found my voice. It came out as a whisper, barely audible even in the absolute silence of the clearing. "Please!" The creature laughed. It was a high, thin sound, like glass breaking, like ice cracking, like something that had once been human but had long ago forgotten how. It took another step forward, and I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. The wind came from nowhere. One moment the air was perfectly still, frozen in that unnatural silence that had swallowed the forest. The next, a gust of freezing wind exploded through the clearing with the force of a hurricane so powerful that it knocked me backward onto the wet grass. Leaves and twigs whipped through the air like shrapnel. The ancient tree in the center of the clearing groaned and swayed, its twisted branches clawing at the sky, and the floating skin, that horrible glowing membrane that had been hovering motionless above the treetop, was suddenly caught in the current and sent spinning wildly through the darkness. The creature's reaction was instantaneous. Its attention snapped away from me, tracking the skin as it tumbled through the air, and a sound escaped its lipless mouth that I can only describe as a shriek of pure rage. It was the sound of a predator watching its prey escape. For one heartbeat, maybe two, the creature was distracted. Its body tensed as if preparing to leap into the air and catch its wayward skin. Those membranous wings began to unfold from its back, spreading outward like the wings of some hellish butterfly. That was my chance, the only chance I was going to get. I did not think. Thinking would have gotten me killed. I simply moved, scrambling to my feet and launching myself toward the tree line with every ounce of strength I had left. The wet grass slipped beneath my sneakers. My legs burned with exhaustion. My lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. But I ran. I ran like I had never run before in my life. Behind me, I heard the creature scream again. This time, the sound was different, closer, angrier. I did not look back. I just ran crashing into the undergrowth at the edge of the clearing, branches whipping across my face and arms, thorns tearing at my clothes, roots grabbing at my ankles like skeletal fingers reaching up from the earth. I could hear it behind me now. Not the sound of footsteps, but something worse. The rustle of wings cutting through the air. The crack of branches being shoved aside by something large and fast. And underneath those sounds, a constant wet clicking like teeth snapping together in anticipation of a meal. It was gaining on me. No matter how fast I ran, no matter how desperately I pushed my exhausted body, the sounds were getting closer. The creature was faster than me, stronger than me. It knew this forest in ways I never could. I was a mouse fleeing from an owl, a rabbit running from a wolf prey that had somehow escaped the trap, only to find itself in a larger cage with no exit. My foot caught on a root. I went down hard, my hands scraping against rocks and dead leaves, my chin striking the ground with enough force to make stars explode across my vision. Pain lanced through my ankle, sharp and immediate. I tried to get up, but my leg buckled beneath me. Sprained, maybe broken. It did not matter which. The result was the same. I was not going to outrun this thing. The sound stopped. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the noise of pursuit. I lay on the ground, my face pressed against the damp earth, my breath coming in ragged gasps, waiting for the killing blow. Waiting for those black talons to sink into my flesh. Seconds passed, then more seconds. Nothing happened. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up onto my elbows and looked around. The forest was dark and still. I could not see the creature anywhere, could not hear it moving through the undergrowth. Had it given up, I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that I had escaped, that the nightmare was over, that I could somehow find my way back to the village and pretend this had all been a terrible dream. But I knew better. Predators do not give up on their prey. They stalk, they wait, they let their victims believe they are safe, and then they strike. I forced myself to my feet, putting most of my weight on my good leg. The pain in my ankle was intense, throbbing in time with my heartbeat, but I could still move. Slowly, carefully, one step at a time. I chose a direction at random and started walking. Every few seconds I stopped and listened, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. The forest remained silent. And then, without warning, the trees opened up. I stumbled out of the forest and found myself on a hillside overlooking a valley. Below me, scattered across the landscape like fallen stars, were the lights of San Miguel Contla. The village. Home. Safety. Relief flooded through me with such intensity that my legs nearly gave out. I had made it. Somehow, against all odds, I had escaped. That was when I heard the voice. "Did you think you could run from me, little mouse?" It came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper that seemed to originate inside my own skull. The words were Spanish, but the accent was wrong, archaic, the way people might have spoken hundreds of years ago. I spun around, searching the darkness for the source of the voice. The tree line was only a few feet behind me, a wall of black shadows that could have hidden an army. "You saw what you should not have seen." The voice was closer now. "You know what I am, what I do. That knowledge is dangerous, little mouse. Dangerous for you." I backed away from the tree line, stumbling on my injured ankle, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "Please," I managed to say, "I will not tell anyone, I swear. I will keep your secret. Just let me go." The silence that followed was heavy with consideration. For one brief, shining moment, I thought it might actually work. I thought the creature might decide that I was not worth the trouble. Then the laughter started. It went on, rising and falling in waves until I wanted to clamp my hands over my ears and scream just to drown it out. Secrets. The voice was directly behind me now. I could feel breath on the back of my neck, cold and fetid, smelling of copper and decay. Do you know how many people have promised to keep my secrets over the centuries? Do you know how many of them broke that promise the moment they felt safe? I did not turn around. I could not turn around. My body had locked up, every muscle frozen. But you are young. The voice had changed, becoming almost thoughtful. Young and foolish and so very afraid. Perhaps you can be useful to me. Perhaps you can be allowed to live if you prove yourself worthy. Worthy. The word escaped my lips before I could stop it. What do you mean? The creature moved. I felt it rather than saw it, a displacement of air, a shift in the darkness. And then it was standing in front of me, between me and the village lights, its skinless body glistening in the faint starlight, that terrible gaze fixed on my face with an intensity that made my soul want to flee my body. I have watched you, Diego Serrano. It knew my name. I have watched you watching me. Curiosity burns in you like a flame. It is what drew you out tonight. It is what led you through the forest. Curiosity is a gift, little mouse, and a curse. It raised one hand, those black talons glinting in the starlight, and traced a line down my cheek. The touch was ice cold and left a trail of numbness in its wake. I could kill you now. It would be easy. A flick of my wrist and your throat would open like a flower. Your blood would water this hillside, and by morning the coyotes would have scattered your bones across the valley. No one would ever know what happened to you. The creature smiled, its needle teeth glinting. But that would be a waste. You have potential, Diego. Potential that I have not seen in a very long time. What do you want from me? I whispered. The creature stepped back, giving me room to breathe for the first time since it had appeared in front of me. I want nothing, not yet. But the day will come when I call upon you, and when that day comes, you will answer. You will do what I ask without question, without hesitation, and in return I will let you keep your life, your family's lives, the lives of everyone you love. It was not a bargain. It was a threat wrapped in the thinnest veneer of choice. Say yes and live as a slave to this monster's whims. Say no and die here on this hillside along with everyone I cared about. There was only one answer I could give. Yes, I said. The word tasted like ashes in my mouth. I will do what you ask. The creature's smile widened. Its wings unfurled behind it, spreading outward until they blocked out the stars. Remember this night, Diego Serrano. Remember what you saw. Remember what you promised. And remember this above all else. It paused, and when it spoke again, its voice was no longer a whisper, but a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. I am always watching. Then the wind came again, sudden and violent, and the creature was gone, swept away into the darkness like a leaf in a hurricane. The floating skin that had been drifting somewhere overhead shot past me, a blur of red light that streaked across the sky toward the village below. I stood alone on the hillside, trembling, gasping, my mind struggling to process everything that had happened. I do not know how long I stood there. Eventually the cold drove me to move. I limped down the hillside toward the village, toward home, toward the illusion of safety that I would never truly feel again. By the time I reached my house, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Dawn was coming. I slipped through the back door as quietly as I could, made it to my room, and collapsed onto my bed. I did not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the creature's face, those burning orbs, those needle teeth, that skinless body glistening in the starlight. Some people are afraid of the dark because they cannot see what is hiding in it. I am afraid of the dark because I know exactly what is hiding in it, and I know that it knows exactly where I am. I must have fallen asleep at some point because the next thing I remember is my mother's voice calling my name from somewhere far away. Diego. Diego, wake up. It is almost noon. Are you sick? I opened my eyes to find sunlight streaming through my window. My body felt like it had been beaten with hammers. Every muscle ached, and my ankle, wrapped in a makeshift bandage I did not remember applying, throbbed with a deep, persistent pain. I am fine. I called back, my voice hoarse. Just tired. I will be out soon. I found an old pair of crutches in the back of the closet and used them to hobble to the bathroom. The face that stared back at me from the mirror was almost unrecognizable. Dark circles under my eyes, a long scratch running from my temple to my jaw. I looked like someone who had seen a ghost, or something far worse. I made my way to the kitchen. My mother was standing at the stove stirring a pot of soup. She looked up when I entered, and her eyes widened at the sight of my crutches. "What happened to you?" I fell. The lie came easily, too easily. Last night. I could not sleep, so I went for a walk and I fell in the dark. My mother's eyes searched my face, looking for the truth behind my words. After a long moment she sighed and shook her head. "You need to be more careful, Micho. Walking around at night is dangerous. Promise me you will not do it again." "I promise," I said. And I meant it. Not because of the danger she imagined, but because I knew what else walked the roads after dark. That was when I heard my mother gasp. She was standing at the window now, her hand pressed against the glass, her face pale. I hobbled over to stand beside her, following her gaze out into the yard. The chicken coop was open. The door hung off its hinges, and scattered across the grass in front of it were the bodies of our chickens, all 6 of them. They lay in a neat row, their feathers pristine, their eyes open and staring at nothing. There was no blood, no visible wounds. They looked like they had simply laid down and died. Beside them lay our sheep wool, still white and clean. And at the end of the row, his brown fur matted with dew, was Chico, our dog, the dog I had raised from a puppy. All of them drained, all of them bloodless, all of them dead. My mother's hand found mine and squeezed. "Madre de Dios," she whispered. What happened? I did not answer. I could not answer, because I knew exactly what had done this. She was sending me a message, reminding me of the power she held, showing me what she could do to the things I loved if I ever forgot my promise. I looked toward Doña Soledad's house, visible through the gap in our fence, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The day passed in a blur. My father burned the animal bodies in a pit at the edge of our property. My mother scrubbed the chicken coop with bleach. Neighbors stopped by to offer theories. Poisoned grain, toxic fumes, a curse. That last theory came from old Senor Gutierrez, who claimed to have the second sight. He stood in our backyard and shook his head slowly. "This was no natural death," he said. "Dark magic was done here last night." He looked toward Doña Soledad's house as he spoke. So did everyone else. But no one said her name aloud. Evening came slowly. I stood on our porch watching the light fade, feeling dread building in my chest. That was when I saw her. Doña Soledad was standing in front of her house, just standing there, motionless, facing my direction. She raised one hand. The motion was slow, deliberate. And then she smiled. It was not the smile of a kindly old woman. It was the smile of someone who owned me completely and wanted me to know it. I went back inside and locked every door and window. I pushed my dresser in front of my bedroom door. I knew it would do nothing to stop a creature that could flow through cracks like smoke. But it made me feel better. A little. I did not sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. For 2 weeks I lay awake, listening to every sound, flinching at every shadow, waiting for the call that would signal the end of my brief reprieve. It never came. The creature seemed content to let me suffer in anticipation. She did not contact me, did not make any demands. She simply existed, living next door, sending that terrible smell drifting through our walls. But something had changed. Colors seemed less vivid. Food tasted like ash. Laughter felt hollow. I moved through my days like a ghost going through the motions, while my mind remained trapped in that clearing, staring into those burning orbs that promised an eternity of servitude. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. I was sitting in my classroom staring blankly at a textbook when I realized with sudden clarity that I could not do this anymore. I could not pretend everything was fine. I could not spend another night lying awake waiting for the axe to fall. I needed to leave. It took me another week to convince my parents. I told them I wanted to finish my education in Mexico City where the schools were better. I told them I had been feeling restless, eager to see more of the world. I told them everything except the truth. They did not want me to go. My mother cried. My father argued. But in the end they agreed. The morning I left, I walked past Doña Soledad's house one final time. The windows were shuttered as always. There was no sign of life within. But as I reached the end of the street, I heard something. A sound so faint I might have imagined it. The sound of laughter, high and thin, drifting through the morning air like smoke. I did not look back. I kept walking, my bag heavy on my shoulders. I walked to the bus station and bought a one-way ticket to Mexico City. I climbed aboard and found a seat by the window, watching as the village grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared behind a curve in the road. I have not been back since. That was 8 years ago. I built a new life in the city, found a job, made friends, tried to forget. Most days I almost succeed. Most days I can pretend that what happened in Tlaxcala was just a bad dream. But then the full moon rises and I cannot sleep. Then I catch a whiff of something rotting on the breeze and my heart races. Then I see a flash of red light in the corner of my eye and I spin around to find nothing but shadows. She has not called upon me yet. After all these years, I have begun to wonder if she ever will. Perhaps she has forgotten about me. Perhaps I was never important enough to remember. Or perhaps she is simply waiting for the perfect moment. Waiting for me to let my guard down before reminding me that I never truly escaped. Tlahuelpuchi, do not forget. That is what my grandmother always said. They are patient. They can wait decades, centuries for the right moment to collect what they are owed. I hear something scratching at my window now. It is probably just a tree branch, probably just the wind. That is what I tell myself every night when the sounds start. If you are listening to this, I want you to understand something. The Tlahuelpuchi are real. They walk among us wearing human faces, hiding in plain sight. They are our neighbors, our acquaintances, the strange old women we pass on the street without a second glance. In Tlaxcala, people still place garlic around the beds of newborn babies. They still hang mirrors in windows to confuse the witches. They still whisper prayers to the Virgin Mary when the moon is full. Not because they are superstitious, because they remember this story. Remember it when the night seems too quiet. Remember it when you smell something you cannot explain. Remember it when you feel eyes on the back of your neck and turn to find no one there. The Tlahuelpuchi are not unique to Tlaxcala. Every culture has its own version. The Navajo have their skinwalkers. The Philippines have the aswang. Eastern Europe has the strigoi. Different names, different faces, but the same ancient hunger lurking beneath. What do they call them where you come from? What legends did your grandparents whisper to keep you in bed at night? If you have a story to tell, I want to hear it. Share it, because we're not alone in this. Until then, keep your doors locked, keep your windows closed. And whatever you do, do not follow the red lights when they appear in the night. Some paths once walked cannot be unwalked. Some doors once opened cannot be closed. And some bargains once made bind you forever. I am still waiting for her to collect.